What is going on, guys? Thank you for entering the chamber once again. League of Villains has come out, and we're going to be showcasing a brand new deck that you can play in the new League of Villains format. This is a character that I don't think is very powerful, but I really enjoy the gameplay space that she occupies. And we're talking about none other than Toga 2. Toga 2 is a somewhat defensive, value-focused character that uses her momentum as a resource to ready foundations that you otherwise normally couldn't ready. There are no restrictions around the kinds of foundations that she can ready, only a turn limitation. So you can do some really fun stuff with this character, even if it's not the most competitive. We're going to kick the profile off with what the character does, and then we'll talk about all the cards in the deck, the ratios, why we play them, to kind of give you a good idea of where I'm coming from with this character. I think there's a lot to like about this character from a gameplay perspective. I think she's a lot of fun, but she really suffers because she badly needs momentum for her character to function, which is something you don't want to be doing in this format in the first place. And if you don't have momentum, this character is effectively blank, and that really pushes her down the power level tiers quite a bit. But not every character is meant to be super competitive either. Talking about Toga herself, Toga is a 6-hand, 28 health character with Death, Life, and Water. She comes with 2 enhances and a response. I'm going to talk about the abilities on this character a little out of order, so that way they make more sense. Her primary effect, or her primary ability, is actually her response, where after you flip any momentum twice per turn, you get to ready a foundation that has not been readied. The main reason we play this character is for that response. We want the ability to re-ready foundations and get extra uses out of them. Sometimes this can be very powerful. Her other 2 enhances help make this response more consistent. So, her first enhance once per turn on your turn to flip up a momentum lets you basically recycle a momentum. And we're going to talk about a card very early on that lets us use any random face-up momentum even if it doesn't have an effect in our momentum. There's a way you can kind of flip other momentum. It's very useful. Her last enhance gives your first attack +2 speed. This could have been +1 speed to every weapon, or +2 speed to every attack, or maybe something like Ochako 1 where she sucks something into momentum once per turn. Like, there's a lot of stuff you could have done with this character without like breaking her. They played the speed boost very safe. In fact, it's so minor to this character that sometimes I forget it's there. But that's the character. Into what actually makes this deck tick, we play a playset of Dual Needle Lunge. So Dual Needle Lunge is a 3 for 5 with EX2. Not the best stat line, but it's not the worst. But what's important about Dual Needle Lunge is that it has an enhance where we can lose 3 life and suck it into our momentum from our card pool after it resolves. So we can play this attack, give it 2 speed, so it's a 5 for 5, and then it'll go into our momentum. From there, it has an enhance while it's in our momentum to flip any momentum, not itself, any momentum, and we get to send 2 cards from our opponent's deck to the discard pile. The mill is not very useful, but what's important is that this card does not have to flip itself. It can flip anything. So this card lets us flip any momentum to start readying foundations with our character. So this is actually her biggest engine enabler. Unfortunately, a lot of people now are playing Capture Evildoers, and Capture Evildoers is targeted, so you're going to lose this card to Capture Evildoers quite a bit, but that is what it is. Still, it's a great card. It's also an attack that effectively doesn't count towards aggressive difficulty, and we literally just banned Crone Frog for that reason. So there's a lot to like about this attack. Next up, our other guaranteed momentum grab, we play a playset of Blood Transfer. Now, normally Blood Transfer is not an attack that I'm very high on. It's a 4 mid for 4, which is kind of a moderate stat line. The enhancement or a life drains our opponent 1. We don't have a way to really take advantage of that in this list on death. But we play this simply because it's an attack that more or less guarantees a momentum. If it gets completely blocked, we get 1 card from our deck into our momentum face up, which, like I said, with Dual Needle Lunge, even if the card that we grab doesn't have a momentum ability, we can still use Dual Needle Lunge to start flipping it and our character to flipping that momentum back face up and start readying cards. And if they don't completely block this and they take damage, well then Blood Transfer will go to our momentum at the end of the turn, and Blood Transfer does have its own momentum ability. So this is just another way for us to kind of guarantee that we snap a momentum. Now, to round out our attacks that are basically guaranteed momentum, we play 2 copies of Pillar Swing. Pillar Swing will go to our momentum if it's completely blocked, and it's a beefy 6 difficulty move, so it's a little hard to play in mass, but it's also as a 3 mid for 8, it's got a good stat line. It's very plausible to play this card on a 6 as your opening attack, have it get fully blocked so it goes to momentum, then you play a dual needle lunge, which will also go to momentum, and at this point, if your opponent's blocking moves to try to not die, you still have an open card pool and you've actually generated 2 momentum, and now you can start using the momentum with a couple of the cards that are in this deck. Outside of that, Pillar Swing is just a very beefy attack with stun 2, so it's also good for getting our pressure started, but it is also a 6 difficulty move, so it's a little hard to play early, so we only play 2 copies of it. But this attack nicely supplements our dual needle lunges and blood transfers as a way to generate automatic momentum. Now, Dual Needle Lunge does have EX2, so we can use Dual Needle Lunge as a momentum dump. But outside of Dual Needle Lunge, our only other way that we can really burn momentum from our attacks, we play a playset of Piercing Needle. This card has EX3, which is nuts. It also comes with a very powerful Deadlock with Stun 3. This move is kind of a deceptive stat line because it says it's a 4 mid for 5, but it's really a 4 mid for 7 because if they take any damage from this attack, it can then burn our opponent for 2 later. And this is also just our best way to, you know, this deck can generate a lot of momentum. If we get them to like a lower health total, we can stack momentum on this card and just drive it home as like a 20 speed move. Obviously, you don't want to do that if they have a speed reset, but, you know. And outside this is just a very efficient 4 difficulty card. And importantly, it's a weapon on top of all of the other attacks that we play that are weapons. And that's important because we play a playset of Binding Cloth Assault. Cloth Assault is in here strictly as a card advantage tool. We really don't have a good way to trigger the speed boost if you put an action, and that is unfortunate. I could see a adjustment to this deck if you wanted to, would be to find some kind of action like maybe Evil Gaze that you could play some amount of. That way you could also get the speed boost on this card. We played this just for the hand sifting effect. This is a +1 to your hand, but what's neat about it is that it's a +1 to your hand that you have some control over in terms of sculpting because you discard a card and draw 2. So if I'm looking for attacks, I can discard a foundation, and if I'm trying to build, I can discard a spare attack. So this can help really like fix your hand in terms of what you're digging for, compared to the effect of just a draw 1. So this is our main kind of card advantage tool, and while Dual Needle Lunge and sometimes Pillar Swing leave our momentum, Blood Transfer and Piercing Needle don't, so fulfilling the card requirement for this is not very difficult. To round out our attacks, we play 1 non-weapon, and that's 3 copies of Vile Seasoning. Seasoning is likely to be a new staple on all of its symbols, so it's not surprising. It's a 3 high for 4, which isn't the best stat line either, but it comes with a nice 1 high block and breaker, but we mostly play this for the 2 enhances on this card, both of which are very powerful. The first enhance on Vile Seasoning makes your opponent check a 7, and if they fail, you draw a card and this attack gets 2 damage. So, assuming they check a 5, they either stun themselves 2, or they give you a card and some damage on this attack. And if they don't check a 5, you're going to get that second ability. There's no way they're going to stun themselves 3 or 4 to deny you a card and a bit of damage. The Deadlock enhance on this is also incredible. If you catch your opponent sleeping, if they go into Deadlock and you have some decent attacks, the Deadlock response of your opponent's checks get -2 for the turn, basically kills them. It's like +2 speed in all of your attacks. It messes with anything else that they try to do that requires them to make a check, which sometimes comes up. Very, 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 very powerful Deadlock. Basically kills your opponent every time it comes up. Okay, now we're going to get into our foundations, starting with our 3 difficulty moves. We play a playset of Blood Transfer. Blood Transfer is our primary use for momentum and our primary source for card draw. This card, when it gets readied once per turn, by any effect it'll draw a card, and then it has an enhance that, while it's committed, we can discard a momentum and either ready it or flip one of our opponent's momentum. So this card kind of incidentally protects us against things like Electric Jolt or Meteor Shower, or I guess if you're in the mirror match, I don't think there's going to be a lot of Toga 2 running around, but if you're in the mirror match, this card will protect you. Alternatively, we can just use it as a card draw engine. We can ready if we flip something off our character, or we can flip a momentum, ready something else, then discard that momentum and ready a blood transfer to kind of get like full use out of it, and then we'll draw a card with blood transfer. So this card is very good in this character. It's a decent card in general, but there's so much competition on life and water, and sometimes even death because of Excited for Blood. And we're going to talk about the other 3 that we now got. It can be very hard to slot this card in most characters, but I think if you're playing Toga 2, you want to play a set of it. Now the other 3 we play is 3 copies of League Invitation. This card is messed up. I just did a set review with Ace Maneuvers talking about this card, and he gave it an S. I think this card's in like A tier for me, not quite S tier, but it's incredibly good. Commit your rival's next check gets -2. Granted, it's only on your own turn, but this can dissuade your opponent from doing certain higher cost actions if they're deep in like if they're chains, you know, they have 2 or 3 blocks. This can make something like an Evil Gaze become very hard to actually like play without, you know, maybe committing out for it. If they're low on foundations, it can affect the next block mod. Just a very powerful all-around effect. And then while it's committed, you can flip and make your opponent check a 7, and if they fail the check, you get to jolt anything. So this card is nuts stun hate. Like if you get stunned, if you have 2 of these and you get stunned 2, you can over 2 enhances flip both of them and make your opponent basically either stun 4 themselves, or you get to jolt 2 of their cards. This makes it very scary to actually stun you. And I would love to play 4 of it, but the high block slot in this deck is a little occupied, and we're already playing 7 3-decks, so fitting an 8 sucks. But this card is actually very versatile and powerful, and I don't know if it slots into every deck on its symbols, but if you're playing anything even remotely kind of like slow and controlling, you got to give this card a try. It is, I'm amazed this card is a common. Into our 2s. We play 3 copies of Stalking Her Prey. I really want to play 4 of this card, but like I said, our high block slot is a little clogged. But man, this card does everything for this character. Flip for -3 speed is a ton of speed hate. The condition to get to resolve the ability is very trivial. It's not hard to get for your opponent to put speed on their moves. Anytime you want to put speed hate, use speed hate like this. Flip for -3 is quite a bit. They're going to be putting speed on their attack, so that condition's not a concern. The fact that its response is sometimes useful because it doesn't cost your enhanced step, which is occasionally important. And then in Toga, it comes with the extra ability where we can flip and remove a momentum and grab anything in our discard pile and put it into our momentum. So this card is a neat kind of like engine enabler, where if we need to get a certain effect into our momentum, maybe we have a couple of random face-ups, but we don't have a dual needle lunge, we can lose one of those face-ups and grab a dual needle lunge and start flipping stuff. We can grab you know, something with a flip effect. Very, very useful all-around card. I would love to play 4 of it, but the high block slot makes it a little tough. Next, we play 3 copies of In Control. In Control is a effectively modal card that comes with 4 modes, and all 4 modes are very powerful. Flip for +2 speed, flip for -2 speed. Both of those effects are great. Flip to hack a check to play a throw by 2 can disincentivize playing a throw. You know, if they check a 3 on the throw, you could like flip this and make them either commit 4 to play the throw, which they probably won't, or lose the attack. Very good exchange there. And then if your opponent's not paying attention, they try to block with a throw. The ability to basically hack their check by 2 at like response speed if they block with a throw can sometimes put them in situations where they were going to successfully block an attack, but now that they can't. It's probably the least useful, since it's more or less the same thing as just like flipping for speed. But sometimes if you kind of give up on an attack and then you see that they check a 3 and the In Control would matter, being able to, in the middle of the block step, say, actually, I am going to use this now and hack your check by 2 and drive this attack home. Very, very nice upside. All of the modes on this card are very good. Just wish it didn't have a 4 check. Next, we play 3 copies of Nothing to See Here. Now, this is a bit of a weird inclusion for this deck because we don't have very many Furies. We have some Furies, but one of our Fury attacks is also a mid. We can trigger this on like most of the abilities, or off most of the attacks in this deck, but not all of them. But what's neat in this character is, like I said, we can ready anything. So we can commit, and then if our opponent blocks our attack, they have to blow something up, and then flip something and ready it. and then just hold on to it for the turn. On defense, the ability to pitch momentum for -3 speed just helps us stay alive. We tend to have lots of ways to generate momentum, but once they're flipped and down, our character only readies once a turn, so as the game goes on, assuming we're surviving, we end up with some momentum that we can just kind of spare to burn. And Nothing to See here gives us a way to burn that spare momentum to help keep ourselves alive. It's a very good exchange rate. Card is unique, which hurts it a bit, but it's a very neat card in this deck. So we played a few copies of it. It puts in some work. The last foundation we play 3 copies of in our 2 slot. We play 3 copies of Graceful Maneuvers. This is just our recursive speed hate. We play a lot of 3s in this deck because we're kind of like a toolbox and we can reuse these foundations and pull them back up for use if we need to. Maneuvers is just like effectively -2 speed on top of ignoring progressive difficulty, so we can get a lot of mileage out of this card. It is a commit cost, so it's a great card to commit to pass a block, and then we can flip and ready it and then commit it on the next attack to pass the block on that attack as well. So this is an all-star defensive card in this character. Getting to our more conditional cards, we play 2 copies of Up Close and Personal. Up Close and Personal is a foundation that really counts as a momentum. Whenever we deal damage with a tech or weapon attack, which is basically everything in the deck outside of Vial Seasoning, we can move it from our stage into our momentum face up, and while it's in our momentum, we can flip to give something -2 speed. So this card is both a engine enabler, as it helps create face-up momentum, while also having a tool for us to use in our momentum. On occasion, we can get a little bit more mileage from flipping this card to Stalking Her Prey and grabbing it and putting it into our momentum from our discard pile than we would for just flipping from -3 speed. Because once we flip Stalking Her Prey to get this card, flipping it in momentum for -2 speed and readying something is kind of also -3 speed, since we minus it by 2, but we get a foundation back. But sometimes we want the foundation that we got more than the 3rd speed loss, especially if it's like a Graceful Maneuvers. So if we kind of need to get both halves, so to speak, out of a Stalking Her Prey, being able to flip Stalking Her Prey and grabbing this card from the bin, also very powerful. It's a little conditional in that we don't always want to build this on our first turn, because it pulls itself from our board, so it debuilds us. It can feel really bad to like build one of these, play Pillow Swing on a 6, check a 3, and you commit 3/4 and leave this up. And then, granted, you're going to get like some momentum no matter what, but if they take the Pillar Swing and you load this in, like, now you actually don't have a board. You're committed out outside of your character, so you like have to build. So it doesn't always feel great to play early, so I'm going to play 2 copies of it. But this is an effect that you kind of want somewhere on standby. Next, we play 2 copies of Mastermind's Apprentice. This is just deadlock control for us. We're kind of playing a slower game where we're trying to poke and set up our opponent and then hit them with a large momentum dump on a kill turn. So in the meantime, we need ways to control our stage. We have a lot of things that will flip for cost in some manner. You know, they're one and done effects, cards like Stalking Her Prey or In Control. So once those effects are gone and used up, being able to use them as basically either stun 1 or +2 speed, depending on what our opponent checks, is useful. This card can be used defensively, but it's kind of a tough sell. But sometimes the -1 is what you need. It just helps us. This card just helps keep us out of deadlock. And to help supplement our 2 copies, we play 1 copy of Brute Strength. This is like a 3rd version of Mastermind's Apprentice, but where Apprentice can pump and manipulate speed. This is just damage pump. The damage in this deck is actually pretty decent. We're playing a lot of like 5 difficulty moves. We have some Pillar Swings. Vial Season can be for 6. Piercing Needle burns our opponent. Blood Transfer burns our opponent. We usually don't have too hard of a time closing games out, but having a single copy of Brute Strength as a 3rd way to control our stage, and sometimes on kill turns to just start pumping damage values, is very useful. For our last 2 difficulty foundation, we play 1 copy of Glamorous. Now, I know it seems kind of weird. Glamorous is a very commonly played card, and if you wanted to, you could replace this with Tray Sheet Cape, but I wanted this to be another foundation and not a asset. A lot of the foundations in this deck flip to do their thing. League Invitation, In Control, Stalking Her Prey, and that's just off our 3 and 2 discs. We have more in the 1 difficulty slots, and we're playing Tight-Lipped as well. Our opponent can flip stuff. So we get some mileage out of Glamorous being able to flip and get extra uses out of these foundations as necessary. And then on top of that, Glamorous itself can flip to put a bunch of speed on an attack that's had its speed reduced. So if we play, like, you know, later on in the turn, we play like a Pillar Swing and we give it some speed, it's very tough for our opponent to reduce the speed on that Pillar Swing, because if it ever gets down to like 2, we can immediately flip and put 3 more speed on it. Very scary for them. So this is a little technical of a card that you could replace with Tray Sheet Cape if you wanted to, but I really like this card at 1-of. I think it's a little underrated in decks that have a lot of foundations that flip for value. It's been very good for me in the past, so you should give this a try. Into our ones, we play a playset of Happy Go Lucky. Our low block slot is a little thin. Happy Go Lucky just lets us commit to grab a low block on command. This is another form of card draw, because like I said, the base card draw on our character is very poor. Granted, this only can draw a copy of itself, but being able to guarantee a low block means we can skimp on lows and play more mids and highs. We have a lot of highs, so I prefer to cut a couple of highs to fit a couple more mids, but we also want all the effects in this deck. But yeah, Happy Go Lucky finds us a low block, it's card draw. If our opponent has Foundation Destruction, it's great to blow up a Happy Go Lucky to get cards off it as well. It's a great spam foundation. And then we play 3 copies of Struggling with Studies. This is soft card draw for us, in that when our opponent's trying to like run us down and go deep, being able to flip and pick up something we've already blocked with can be life-saving. We have some breaker effects on high. We have Vile Seasoning. We also have Play Showdown. Shocker. So being able to recycle those high blocks can end our opponent's turn and make our return turns very powerful. And then this card also protects our stage, in that if our opponent tries to flip any of our cards, we can flip this in response and cancel that. So this also stops our opponent from flipping like more viable foundations. It's a great spam foundation. Sees play on all of its symbols all the time. We play 3 copies of Shock Absorption. This is good early defense if we get stunned out. Having the ability to still destroy a foundation for -2 speed can be life-saving. We're in a very aggressive format, so having a card like this that counts as effectively 3 foundations on defense, even if you have to blow it up, can be the difference between you getting destroyed on turn 1 or surviving. Very underrated foundation. I know a lot of people meme on this card, but I'm a big fan of it. And then finally we play 2 copies of House of Cards. We need some kind of in-deck momentum hate. Momentum is going to be very important to control next format, and this card gives us targeted momentum control on top of messing with our opponent's checks. Worst case scenario, we can, if we have to have a build turn and our opponent has a foundation face up, you can also flip this and load a foundation to the top of their deck, and basically reduce, hopefully, the number of attacks that they draw for their turn, as you guarantee they're drawing a foundation. So if you know your opponent's trying to sculpt, House of Cards can also kind of disrupt that sculpting a bit. It's a very flexible card, but we don't have a great use for the remove to load an attack on top outside of the built-in value you get with the momentum control. But most of the effects we have that make our opponents make checks, they're going to be failing anyways. Like, we really don't need to flip a League Invitation and then flip this to make them check a 3. That's usually not a thing that we need to do. So this card is mostly just in here for the momentum control. Into our zeros, we play a playset of Surviving the Final. This card just counts as basically 2 foundations for defense. -1 speed once per turn, helps you stay alive. Very straightforward. And then the other 0 we play is Tight-Lipped. Tight-Lipped is mostly there to help us close out the game when we're going in. You know, we can start flipping foundations, blowing them up with Mastermind's Apprentice or Brute Strength. We start generating stats that way. So it's just a way for us to kind of like throw our board at the opponent, so to speak, when we're trying to kill them. Get those last couple of points in. It also comes with a very powerful 1 mid block. It's a very flexible block on defense. Very good card. And because I wanted a 1 more 0, we play 1 copy of Enamored. This response, that if it gets readied by one of your effects for +1 or -1 speed, rarely comes up. We usually just have better things to get multiple uses out of. Typically stuff like Graceful Maneuvers or Nothing to See Here, or Blood Transfer, sometimes even League Invitation. But I guess you can, in theory, flip a momentum to ready this and give something -1 speed, so it kind of counts as 2. We mostly just wanted a 9/0, and I needed one more low block, so. And that completes our foundation lineup, and all we have left are our actions and our assets. So for assets, we play 2 copies of League of Villains. League of Villains is a very powerful card, but this is one of the reasons why we play a lower attack count. This is a 71 card list, and we play 20 attacks, which is a little low. To me, League of Villains effectively takes up like half an attack slot. It doesn't check a 3, but the 4 difficulty here means that you probably can't play this on a card where you're playing attacks. So you need to trim your attack count at least a little bit to slot this card. I think if you cut this card, League of Villains, I mean, you would immediately replace these with attacks and not with like assets or foundations to bump your attack count up. Now that being said, League of Villains is incredible in this deck because we have ways to ready the foundation that we commit with League of Villains for the cancel. So in effect, very often League of Villains is just an asset where we can commit just itself to block an ability. And it's effectively like an Omni Negate. It stops anything off an attack or foundation, which is most of the stuff in the game. So it's a very, very powerful response that can absolutely save your life. The second response doesn't come out very often. It's a bit of burn, I guess, but we really play this for the first response, for the true Omni Cancel. It just sucks that you can't play this on turn 1, and playing it like on turn 2 usually means you didn't attack very much. Sometimes you'll play like a dual needle lunge on a 5, the dual needle lunge will leave, and then you can play League and build like 3 more cards after that and hold a couple of blocks, and you're in like a pretty good position at that point. But yeah, and then as I mentioned before, for the action for the deck, we play 2 copies of Showdown. If you're on these symbols, I think 2 is the perfect number to play. This card gets very cloggy if you have 2 copies of it in your hand, because it is literally just a high block. The action negate is kind of limited and very costly, so you're really just playing this as a +3 high block that does nothing unless you block with it. So I don't like having more than one of this card ever in my hand, so I only play 2. I think 3 or 4 is just too many. Maybe you could sideboard a 3rd if you see a deck is playing a lot of highs. That being said, the block response can absolutely shut a turn down, stick a block, you know, give your opponent, like, lose 2 of their assets of, you know, whatever, like, their best foundations, and then if they continue to attack, you can start, like, flipping League Invitations to start jolting them down. You have a lot of ways to kind of, like, stop turns, and then when you get into your turn, because you committed them out, they're very vulnerable. It's a very good card. That completes our deck profile for Toga 2. Like I said, I'm a really big fan of this character in terms of like as a locals deck. I think this deck is a blast to play, and I would strongly recommend it if you wanted to give Death, or really this character, a try. I think Water is a little clunky with this character, and if you want to play her on life, you should just play Toga 1. Toga 1 uses a lot of the cards in Toga 2's kit better than she does, and she also uses a lot of the life kit better. But I like Toga 2 on Death a lot. Granted, you could try something on life if you want to. You know, she does have the symbol still. Great locals deck. It's a ton of fun. Not the most competitive. If you want to give this a try, like on Tabletop Simulator, you want to buy it for yourself, make sure you check out the description, because I'm going to include a link to the UVS Ultra for this entire deck list for your, you know, ease of access. It's not a very expensive deck. Most of the cards in here aren't too expensive outside of Vial Seizing, which I expect is going to be a somewhat pricey ultra rare. But outside of that, and maybe Dual Needle Lunge, this is also a fairly budget-friendly deck, despite being a beefy 71 cards. So if you want to kind of try out Toga, or try out the Death symbol, and you want to play something a little different, give this deck a try. I don't think this is going to be showing up at like regional license exams or whatever, but it's a good locals deck. If you made it this far, please consider liking and subscribing, and make sure to stay tuned, as I'm going to be covering all of the characters in League of Villains over time. Once again, thank you for entering the chamber, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.